When I was about 13, my group of mischievous friends and I would often cause trouble in our small suburban neighborhood. On weekends, our favorite activity was playing pranks, especially on Saturday nights when we would sneak around ringing doorbells and running away. This was a tradition for us, and we had it down to a science. I'm going to use made-up names for my friends, just to keep things simple. There was Jake, Leo, and Charlie. Jake and Leo were the brave ones. They would run up to the doors, ring the bell, and dash away. Charlie and I, on the other hand, would always be the lookouts, hiding behind cars or trees, waiting to see the reaction when the homeowners opened the door. We'd hit around 5 or 6 houses in a night, laughing at each house's reaction, which was always the same: confusion or frustration. Some people would yell at us, some would shake their fists, but none of them really chased us. It was harmless fun. But then, we came across a house on the other side of the neighborhood that changed everything. This block was a little different, more isolated, with overgrown lawns and houses that seemed to have seen better days. One house stood out to us. It was old, with a broken-down car in the yard, and tall grass growing all around. It was the perfect target for one of our pranks. Jake decided to ring the doorbell while Leo and I ducked behind a bush. But before Jake could even get back to us, the door flew open, and a tall, muscular man came storming out. He was fuming, immediately shouting and walking around his yard, looking for whoever was messing with him. We couldn't help but laugh, but we also knew this man was different. He wasn't like the others. He wasn't just annoyed, he was angry. After a while, the man went back inside, and we thought the coast was clear. Jake, always the bold one, decided to try it again. He went to ring the doorbell for a second time, but this time the man was quicker. He came out, but this time he wasn't empty-handed. He had a rifle in his hands. We froze. The man began walking around his yard again, looking in every possible hiding spot, behind his car, behind some trees, even under his porch. We crouched lower, hoping he wouldn't spot us. For what felt like an eternity, the man stood still, staring directly into the woods where we were hiding. My heart pounded in my chest. I'm sure I wasn't the only one feeling terrified. But then, just as suddenly as he had looked our way, he turned around and went back into his house. We were still too scared to move, too scared to even talk. That's when we saw him again, this time in the window, watching us. Jake, still trying to be brave, decided to ring the doorbell again. He quickly ran off, hoping the man wouldn't see him. But we couldn't look away. The man stayed at the window for what felt like forever, watching. After a few tense moments, he finally walked away from the window, but not before we saw him slowly pacing the yard with his rifle still in hand. It wasn't long before we heard Jake shout from across the street, "Run!" We didn't know what was happening at first, but then we heard footsteps, heavy ones, approaching. We turned around and froze. The man was running towards us, rifle aimed directly at us. We bolted. We ran as fast as we could, hearts racing, not daring to look back. We reached Jake, who was already waiting on the other side of the street. We kept running, not stopping until we were several blocks away, safe and out of sight. Jake explained that he had seen the man creeping toward us with the rifle and had shouted to warn us. We didn't report the incident to anyone. It just felt too weird, too unreal. We didn't even tell our parents. We simply shared the story with a couple of friends, but after that, we avoided that area for the rest of our time in the neighborhood. That night was a wake-up call for us. Not all people react the same way to pranks, and some people have a lot more to lose. We never pulled that trick again. I lived in what I can only describe as a house from a nightmare for a couple of weeks. I was a college student, living off campus, and my parents were paying for a small house for me to stay in while I attended classes. It wasn't anything fancy or huge, but it was nice, and I was happy with it. At least I was at first. The trouble started one rainy Saturday. With nothing else to do, I spent the day in front of the TV. But then, while I was watching, I heard a strange scraping sound coming from the living room floor. I looked around, half expecting to see an animal that had somehow gotten inside. After a quick check, I didn't see anything, so I shrugged it off and went back to watching TV. That was the first odd thing that happened. The rain kept pouring down through the night, making it feel like the perfect excuse to stay in. I stayed put, continuing my marathon of TV shows, when I heard another noise, this time from the kitchen. It sounded like something falling. I grabbed a pillow, what I figured could be some kind of weapon, and cautiously made my way to the kitchen. There, in the dark, I found a box of Cheerios on the floor, spilling out hundreds of little O's all over the place. I had no idea how that could have happened. I dropped the pillow and bent down to clean it up, trying to make sense of it. Then, as I was picking up the last of the Cheerios, I heard a floorboard creak, a sound like someone walking on the wood floor. My eyes snapped up, but there was nobody there. I figured I was just overthinking it, maybe being paranoid from the quiet and stormy night. I finished cleaning and returned to the living room, trying to shake the feeling of unease. But that night, after what felt like a peaceful doze while the storm raged on outside, I was abruptly woken up by a loud bang from downstairs. My heart raced, but I couldn't figure out what had caused it. I turned off the TV and decided to go to bed for the night. The next day seemed normal, and the day after that, nothing unusual happened. It wasn't until another dreary, rainy day that things took another bizarre turn. I woke up feeling horribly sick, worse than any hangover I'd ever had. I barely moved all day, lying in bed with the TV on for background noise and a garbage can beside me just in case. Then, around midday, I heard something, footsteps or movement, coming from the attic above me. The attic door was in my bedroom, and I could hear something up there clearly. It wasn't just once, but a few times, like someone was walking around or moving things up there. Even though I felt like I was about to pass out, I managed to pull myself out of bed, grab an old baseball bat for protection, and climb up into the attic. I switched the light on, but there was nothing up there, just some old boxes left by the previous owners. Still, the sounds had been so real. I didn't feel safe, so I quickly climbed down and tried to push it from my mind. That night, I was awoken again, this time by a thud, followed by the distinct sound of something, or someone, moving around in the attic. I was terrified, but this time, I wasn't going to back down. I grabbed the bat, yanked down the attic door, and stormed up the stairs, determined to confront whatever was making those noises. But then, right before I could turn the light on, I heard something I will never forget: a child's giggle. The giggle was so unnatural, so chilling, that I can't even describe the feeling. My body went numb, and I felt my insides drop like I was weightless. Every part of me screamed that this wasn't just my imagination. I didn't even think. I ran out of that house so fast that I barely remember how I got to the front door. In a panic, I called my dad, explaining as best as I could what had happened. He came to pick me up, even though I knew he probably thought I was just shaken up. But the terror in my voice must have convinced him, because the next day, he came to help me pack up all my things. I never went back to that house. I'm still convinced to this day that whatever I experienced in that house wasn't just my imagination. It was something paranormal. It's a chapter I'll never forget, and one I hope I never have to relive. Before we dive into the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support means the world to us. Thanks for watching.
When I was 20, I worked as a maid for an older woman named Mel for a couple of weeks. She lived alone in a large old house on a beautiful property surrounded by woods. The house itself was a bit run down, mostly made of wood, with dark, dimly lit rooms. The atmosphere was strange and eerie, and Mel seemed to like it that way. She always kept the blinds shut in most rooms, even though the property had gorgeous views. Occasionally, I would try to open them to let some sunlight in, but when I came back later, they would always be shut again. Some rooms were lit only by candles, making the place feel even older than it was. The floors creaked with every step, adding to the unsettling vibe. Mel, in her 70s, wasn't in the best health, so my duties included physical work she couldn't manage herself: cleaning, dusting, doing laundry, sorting through her mail and such. One weekend, she asked me to stay the night. She had a few bedrooms, but she lived alone, so it wasn't unusual. I arrived on a Friday, quietly set my things down in the room where I'd be staying, and was about to leave when I noticed Mel standing in the doorway. She didn't greet me. Instead, she gave me a simple instruction to clean the bedroom and straighten up the house. Then she went upstairs, and I didn't see her again for the rest of the day. That night, after a long day of cleaning, I went to bed early. The bed was uncomfortable, and I struggled to fall asleep. After a while, I began to hear footsteps outside my room, slow and steady, like someone walking carefully on the creaky floorboards. I thought it was just Mel moving around, maybe heading to the bathroom. But then, the footsteps stopped right outside my door. I lay there, listening, feeling a chill run down my spine. After what felt like forever, I heard Mel's footsteps moving down the stairs, and the faint sound of a door opening and closing. I had a feeling it was the door to the basement. Mel had always been very protective of it and had made it clear it was off limits to me. Hours later, I heard the door open and close again, followed by slow, heavy footsteps coming back up the stairs. I froze when they stopped outside my door again. This time I listened closely, trying to make sense of the situation. Then I heard the doorknob start to turn. Panic surged through me. I pulled the covers over my head, pretending to be asleep, hoping she would leave. Mel hesitated for a moment, then retreated back down the stairs and into her room. Disturbed but still too frightened to sleep, I waited for what felt like an eternity. After half an hour, I decided I had to know what was in that basement. I sneaked down the stairs, trying to be as quiet as possible, and opened the basement door. The light flickered on, and I crept down the stairs. When I reached the bottom, my blood ran cold. 2 old wooden chairs were placed in the center of the room, and in them were 2 decaying corpses. They had wigs on their heads, and one of them even had a beret. I felt my stomach twist in disgust, but I couldn't look away. I needed to confirm what I was seeing. The bodies were horribly decayed, probably over a year old. Just when I thought I might lose my mind, I heard footsteps from upstairs, and my heart skipped a beat. I couldn't risk being caught. I hid behind a couch, holding my breath as the footsteps grew louder, descending 1 step at a time. Then, I heard Mel's voice, soft but unmistakable. She whispered my name. My fear turned to ice when I peeked around the couch and saw her coming down into the basement, holding a large kitchen knife in her hand. I knew I had to run. As quietly as possible, I bolted up the stairs and across the house, grabbing my backpack along the way. When I reached the front door, Mel was already on the stairs, rushing toward me. I ran out of the house and into my car, barely able to catch my breath. I looked back once, seeing her standing in the doorway, watching me with a cold expression. I drove off in a panic, speeding down the road until I was far away from that house. I never gave Mel any of my personal information, so she never had a way to contact me again. Looking back, I think one of the corpses might have been her dead husband, the one she'd mentioned a few times. As for the other, smaller body, I have no idea who it could have been. But what I saw in that basement still haunts me to this day. Something was deeply wrong with Mel, and I was lucky to have escaped when I did.